everybody, welcome back to my CriCri build. I didn't get as far as I had hoped in the last month on the fuselage. I attempted to create my own bending brake. That didn't go very well. My TIG welder broke. I ended up actually buying a new bending brake that you can probably see in the background there. That's going to be used to bend the fuselage sides and also the trailing edges of the wing skins. I'm going to save that for another video. In this video, we're going to go over the wheels, tires, and brakes for the CriCri. We're going to talk about some of the off-the-shelf options that you can purchase. We're going to go over the pros and cons of those, and I'm going to show you what I'm actually going to be using on my airplane. So stick around. Yes, I'm building the world's smallest twin-engine airplane. I've actually probably spent more time in the last 10 years thinking about wheels, tires, and brakes on a CriCri than probably anything else. Part of the reason for that is I was trying to find an off-the-shelf solution for wheels, tires, and brakes. I'm obviously not going to make my own tires. I don't really want to machine my own wheels, and it'd be nice to find a brake system that we can find that will work on a CriCri. So I think we're going to start off by talking about the nose wheel first on the CriCri. The plans call for a 200 by 50 tire for the nose wheel. 200 is the inflated diameter of the outside of the tire. The 50 is the width of the tire at its widest point when inflated. So it's 200 millimeters in diameter and 50 millimeters wide. 200 millimeters in diameter equates to roughly 8 inches. It's actually about 7 3/4. But if you actually look on the internet and actually look up tires on different websites, it's a lot of times referred to as an 8-inch tire. The 50 millimeters is about 2 inches. So that equates to basically an 8 by 2 tire in inch measurements, whereas it's 200 by 50 in metric. There's a lot of tire options that are available. That tire size is very common in electric scooters and go-peds. It's used as a wheelchair tire. In fact, if you've seen any of the videos on the CriCri or actually been to an air show and been able to see a CriCri, you'll notice that a lot of cases the announcers at the air show will point out a fun fact about the CriCri, and they'll comment about the fact that the nose wheel actually comes from a wheelchair. The older style that had the pneumatic wheel and tire combination in the front for the caster wheels was typically a 200 by 50 tire. So there's a lot of options that you have with even going to a wheelchair company and finding an off-the-shelf wheelchair caster wheel and tire combination and using that on your CriCri. In fact, if you look at pictures of CriCris on the internet, a lot of times you'll even notice that the nose wheel is gray because it is a wheelchair wheel and tire with the non-marking gray rubber tire on it. But when you start looking at wheelchair websites and looking at wheels and tires to use on the CriCri, one of the things that becomes apparent is, number one, there is several options, but in a lot of cases you don't know how well the wheel is made. You don't know necessarily what kind of bearings it has in it. You don't know what kind of tire it actually has on it because the tire is going on a wheelchair. Nobody's really caring about whether it's a 6-ply, 4-ply, or 2-ply tire. So you know, those are things that I think we need to be concerned about when we're talking about putting wheels and tires on an airplane. Number one, the CriCri is going to be traveling down the runway at 45 miles per hour. So we need to make sure that we're using at least some kind of rating of a tire, some kind of knowledge that, you know, what we're using is good enough to be you know, rolling down a runway at 45 miles per hour. We do have to be concerned about the bearings. Again, it's traveling at 45 miles an hour. Whereas in a wheelchair, we're talking 5-10 miles an hour being pushed. So I tried to look at what was available on the wheelchair sites. I tried to then cross-reference that to see if there was any aviation wheels and tires that were available that might be a good substitute where I could at least know the quality that I was working with wheels and tires. And you know, make sure that whatever I bought was easily replaceable in the future. So if you look at what's available on the wheelchair sites, one of the things that becomes apparent is there's a lot of products from China. There's plastic wheels from China that are questionable in quality. I think there's a lot of tires that are coming from China that are questionable in quality, especially what they're putting on a wheelchair. Again, there's Primo brand, there's a couple other brands out there of tires that honestly I'd never even heard of. And I started thinking, well, I need to at least find a tire that cross-references over into a scooter or go-pad or something else. Is it a manufacturer that makes motorcycle tires or makes other tires? So that at least I know what I'm getting is somewhat reliable, at least in my opinion, as far as the quality. So I actually found a couple different options. Number one, you can go full aviation. So this is an Aero Classic 200 by 50 tire. This is an aviation tire. It's got an aviation type tread on it. And this is an option for the CriCri. This, however, this Aero Classic tire is a 6-ply tire. This is an extremely heavy tire for its size. It's very stiff. I can barely pull this tire apart with my fingers. I can't compress it at all. I can't deform it, compress it at all. It's actually very, very stiff. I wouldn't use this on the nose wheel of a CriCri. It's actually too much tire. This is, although it's a very nice tire, I don't think we need a 6-ply heavy tire on the nose wheel of a CriCri. We're probably only going to have, what, 20 pounds of weight on the nose wheel. I'm not talking about a lot of weight. So we don't need a tire like this that's actually designed to support 350 pounds. So this is a very heavy-duty tire that you could use on a tail wheel of an aircraft, a larger aircraft even, and that's what these are typically used for. So I continue to look around for a 200 by 50 tire, trying to find more of a name brand tire that I could use that wasn't as heavy a duty as like the Aero Classic. And there are other tires similar to the Aero Classic. Another brand is Tost, T-O-S-T. They make tires that are 6-ply tires that are similar to the Aero Classic that, again, are a nice option if you want an aviation tire on your aircraft. But one of the things that I found is I found this. So this is a 4-ply 200 by 50 tire made by Kenda. Kenda is made in China also, but this tire is made by a company that makes scooter tires, motorcycle tires. It's actually a brand that, you know, at least the name I recognize. So I was a little bit more comfortable going with this. This actually looks like a very good tire. It's, like I said, it's Kenda brand. It's much more pliable than the 6-ply tire that we have from Aero Classic. I can deform this tire, but this is more than durable enough for the nose wheel on a CriCri. I'm not sure what the poundage rating of this is. I think it's around 200 pounds would be my guess based on the other 4-ply tires that I've seen ratings for on it. So, you know, compare that to the Aero Classic here, which is a 350 pound rated tire. You can see the difference then between a 6-ply and a 4-ply tire. But for me, this is more than adequate for the nose wheel on a CriCri. And so the only other thing we need to be concerned about then is the wheel. Now, I could have just gone to a wheelchair website, found an off-the-shelf wheel and tire combination that came together. A lot of times it's difficult to get those in the non-gray tire. I actually wanted a black tire on my CriCri. I wanted all the wheels and tires to match, or at least the tires to match and all be black. One of the issues you run into when you just go and buy a caster wheel and tire combination off the wheelchair sites is that a lot of those wheels and tire combinations actually come with a non-pneumatic tire, where they've actually taken a tire similar to this and they actually fill it with foam. So that makes it so you don't have to have a tube, it's never gonna go flat, which is nice for, you know, wheelbarrows, hand carts, and wheelchairs. But on a CriCri, I think we need to stick with a pneumatic tire. We need to be able to control the amount of air pressure in that tire. I think the plans actually call for 12 pounds of pressure in that tire. And that's just to give you a little bit of cushion running down the runway, you know, for, you know, brakes and cracks and joints in the runway. It gives you a little bit of cushion having a tire that flexes a little bit. Those tires that are filled with foam, I'm not sure how long that foam would last, especially spinning at potentially 45 miles per hour. And again, we don't know if those tires are balanced well. There could be all kinds of issues with those. So then I had to try and search for a wheel that would work with this tire. Now we know a wheelchair wheel, caster wheel, is probably the right size. And so I did search the wheelchair websites to try and find a wheel option that worked with this, and there's a lot of different ones available. Most of them are plastic. I don't think that's a negative for the CriCri. We're looking for fairly lightweight on the nose wheel, and we're not handling a lot of weight, so we don't really need, I don't think, an aluminum wheel. But what I found was this. So this is an Invacare wheelchair rim that's designed to fit a 200 by 50 tire, and this wheel is very common if you go and look at wheel and tire combinations to come with a tire on it. I was able to purchase this separately because I wanted to buy the tire separately and put the combination together myself. But this actually looks like a very, very good quality plastic wheel. It's got 4 bolts in it. It's nice and smooth on both sides, so you have very little area that's going to get dirty over time, or where debris could get stuck, that type of thing. It comes with 5/16 bearings. There was actually bearing options I could have gotten larger bearings, but the axle size on a CriCri is, I believe, 6 millimeters. These are actually 8 millimeters. This was the smallest size bearing I could get. And 8 millimeters actually seems very common because this bearing size is actually what's used in skateboards and roller skates and rollerblades. So it seems to be a fairly good quality precision bearing. So I'm actually very happy with this wheel that I found here, and this is what I plan on using in combination with the Kenda tire on my CriCri. One of the other things that I noticed about this wheel that has turned out to be an exceptional thing is that this wheel is going to have a tube in it. And a lot of the tubes that you buy are just 90-degree angle valve tubes, which isn't a problem. However, most of the wheels, if this tube was installed, they actually have a hole that goes right down the middle of the rim. This one's actually offset to one side, where it comes out this side, but it's offset to the opposite side of the wheel. The benefit of that, and why I figured out they'd done this, is that if I were just to install this tube in a wheel that had the hole going right down the center and coming out the side, the valve stem would actually stick out further than the side of the hub on the wheel. And so what would happen is if I put this on a fork or put this on a front caster of a wheelchair and it was spinning, the valve stem would actually hit the fork. Unless I were to put some fairly significant, maybe 1/4-inch spacers on either side, which I could do. But it's a nice feature that they've actually added into here, where if I install this tube on here and I put this valve stem there, it's sticking out just enough so that I can put air in it, and just enough so it's clearing the fork assembly that's here. And of course the CriCri is designed to use a fork that's about 2.5 inches wide, which is what this wheel hub width is at the bearings. And so that actually works out really well, so that you can use any standard angle valve tube and install it on this wheel, and you won't have an issue with the valve stem hitting the fork. So one of the other things I did when I was looking at this particular 200 by 50 tire size is I tried to figure out if there was an aviation wheel that I could use instead of going with a wheelchair wheel. It took me a long time to find anything that would fit. I did find some made by Tost, T-O-S-T. They actually make a tail wheel that's designed to work with this size tire. And it looks like a really nice wheel. However, it was about $300 for the wheel. I thought, well, that's too much money, and I don't know again that we need to go with an aluminum machined wheel on the nose wheel. Maybe we should stick with more of a plastic wheel that's lighter weight. But I did find a combination that would work if you wanted to go full aviation quality and use an actual aluminum hub. I saw pictures in Kit Planes magazine of the Subsonics jet made by Sonics Corporation. And everybody's been talking about the landing gear on that aircraft because it uses such small wheels and tires. And I saw a picture of the landing gear on that, and sure enough, I could see that it was using a 200 by 50 tire. Now the wheel that it was using I actually recognized it. I was like, I've seen that wheel before. Where have I seen that? So I went back through all the websites that I had looked for wheels and tires on, looked at the aviation ones like Matco and Grove to try and figure out where I'd seen this wheel before. Well, sure enough, I found it on Matco's website. Now, one of the things I found out is that when I was looking for wheels and tires, I didn't realize that when you're talking about main wheels and tires, like so the main wheels where the brakes are on a nose wheel based aircraft or a tail wheel aircraft, the main wheels, they talk about them in inches in diameter of the rim. So you have 4-inch, 5-inch, and 6-inch wheels for the main wheels, which is basically the bead diameter of the wheel here, 4, 5, and 6 inches. And then you can put any size tire on you want that fits that size rim. But when you're talking about nose wheels and tail wheels, they talk about those in the tire diameter. So when I was looking for what essentially is a 3.7-inch or 4-inch rim to fit either the main wheels on the CriCri or the nose wheel, I was looking for that size wheel. But come to find out that Matco actually does sell a wheel that fits this tire, but they don't list it as a 4-inch wheel or a 3.7-inch wheel. They list this combination as an 8-inch nose wheel. So I was passing by those because I thought this was an 8-inch wheel, and of course you can't tell in the pictures how big the wheel is in diameter. You just look at it and go, okay, well, they're saying that's an 8-inch wheel, that must be an 8-inch wheel. No, they're talking about the wheel and tire combination together when they talk about tail wheel and nose wheel on aircraft site or websites. So anyway, so this is a wheel that is virtually the same size as this plastic wheel that's made by Invacare. This is made by Matco. This fits this tire perfectly. It's designed specifically for a 200 by 50 or an 8 by 2 tire. And so this is an option if you wanted to go full aluminum, aircraft quality wheel on your aircraft. This is the wheel that's used on the Subsonics jet, not only for the nose wheel, but also for the main wheels. And what they've done on the Subsonics is they've actually put 2 of these side by side in a dual axle configuration or dual wheel configuration on both sides of the aircraft. And they're actually using, they're basically using this Aero Classic tire. I think they're using the Tost is the one that I've seen on most of the Subsonics. But they're using this wheel and tire combination on all the wheels and tires on the Subsonics jet. So just be aware there are some other options if you didn't want to go this direction. I gotta say, the one benefit of using this wheel also is that it's already got the bearings basically set at the proper hub width that's used on the fork assembly on the front of the CriCri. If I was going to use this wheel, in place of it, number one, the smallest bearings I could get for this was 5/8 inch. The bearings in here are closer to 1/4 inch at 8 millimeter, which is 5/16. Also, these bearings are inset inside the wheel. They don't come all the way out like the one here does. So I would have to not only, put spacers in here on either side to bring this out to a 2.5 inch width. I'd also have to figure out how to, put some spacers in there to reduce the size of the axle. So it's a lot of extra work when I think this is more than good enough for the CriCri. The one thing I did like about this wheel compared to some of the other plastic wheels is that this feels like a nylon wheel. I don't know what it's made of because again they don't specify these things when you're looking at them on wheelchairs. But this looks like a very sturdy, strong, hard plastic wheel that's made out of something more than just a molded plastic. So I'm actually quite happy with that combination. So just be aware, that's what I'm using on mine, using the Invacare wheel, using a Kenda tire, and this combination together weighs about 1.5 pounds. And that seems fairly reasonable. Just so you're aware, this wheel here weighs, I believe, 0.93 pounds, and this one weighs 0.6 pounds. So this one's a third heavier. It doesn't feel that much heavier, but I think any weight you can take off is beneficial. The other thing is if you have to modify the axle to fit this, you're going to be using additional weight in just spacers that you don't have to use on a wheel like this. So this is what the Kenda tire on the wheelchair wheel looks like once it's installed and inflated. This is a nice, lightweight, good tire. I think this is a nice combination for the CriCri. And you can see, as I mentioned, the valve stem, because they offset that inside the wheel a little bit, it does make it so that it clears the side of the hub, so it won't hit the fork with just a minimal spacer or washer on the inside of here. So that's a nice feature to have, I think. If I showed you this tire here, the Matco one, if I had installed this on the front fork of a CriCri and put the proper spacers in here, this valve stem would actually hit the fork. I actually would have to make the fork wider in order for this combination to work on there. So the next thing we want to talk about is the main wheels and tires and brakes for the CriCri. And if we look at what's in the plans, they call for a 2.5 by 3 tire, which equates to, in metric form, similar to this tire, it's a 210 by 65. Is 2.5 inches wide at this widest point, and the 3-inch is actually the diameter of the rim. So the major difference between what was called out in the plans and this tire, for example, is this uses a rim that's about 3.7 inches. It's actually a special size rim for specifically this size tire. But the CriCri actually calls out for a 3-inch rim, so it's a smaller diameter rim, and then it's slightly wider tire. And if you compared it to this is a 200 by 50, and the CriCri for the main wheels is a 210 by 65. So we're talking about a tire that's really only 10 millimeters taller in diameter than this tire, and in width it's about 15 millimeters wider. So in comparison, it's not a lot bigger than this tire right here. But that tire is actually not very common at all anymore. You can still find wheels, 3-inch wheels, with that size tire, and it's used again as a tail wheel on certain aircraft. You can still buy that tire from Aircraft Spruce, for example, but I couldn't really find any wheels that fit it other than very expensive wheels, again, made by Tost. I decided right away that I wasn't going to try and figure out a wheel and tire combination that would work with that exact size tire. And honestly, people who have built the CriCri outside of getting the wheels and tires from the kit, or from what was available in Europe on the market, most people have gone to a different size wheel and tire combination altogether. Partly because the wheels and tires on the CriCri were designed to have a drum brake that actually fit inside of that 3-inch wheel, and it was a 3-inch wheel that was made specifically for the CriCri. And if you're looking at a tail wheel combination, you don't really have an option for brakes in that scenario, and you're going to have to create your own brake system, either disc brake system or jerry-rig some kind of drum brake system. So I didn't want to even pursue that route at all. I basically just said that size tire isn't going to work. We're going to have to go with something else. Now, what most people have done that haven't used the CriCri wheels and tires is they've gone to this size tire. This is a 2.80 by 2.50 by 4. And what that means in size is that it's 2.8 inches wide at its widest part here when it's inflated. Its section height from the bead all the way to the top of the tire is 2.5 inches. And the 4 means that it runs on a 4-inch wheel. Now, the good thing about that is there's a lot of 4-inch wheels available. And this is actually a fairly common tire size for go-peds, scooters, that type of thing. There's a ton of 4-inch wheels, like I said, available. You can even buy really nice billet aluminum 4-inch wheels that fit, tires that fit on a 4-inch rim. So the only problem that I found with this combination and trying to use this tire is this tire is really made for a 4-inch diameter wheel that's fairly narrow. So this is really designed to be put on a rim that only has a width of about 2.25 inches. Whereas most of the 4-inch wheels that you see out there for go-peds and scooters is a 3-inch wide wheel, which is almost too wide for this. It actually stretches the tire quite a bit. The tire doesn't look like it fits very well. And your only option, if you're going to use then that 4-inch wheel that's 3 inches wide, is to go up to the tire size that's used typically on the go-peds and scooters, which is a 10 by 3 tire. So as we talked about before, this is basically considered an 8-inch tire, and it's actually about 7 3/4. This is considered a 9-inch tire, because if you take the 4 inches of the rim and then you add the 2.5 on either side, you get 9-inch in diameter. You can go all the way up to a 10-inch tire, which is designed to be used on go-peds. It's 10 inches tall and it's a full 3 inches wide at its widest part, instead of this one, which is 2.8. So it's not a huge amount bigger than this, but when you're going from, you know, a fairly narrow tire and rim combination all the way up to a rim that's 3 inches wide, it starts to look too big on a CriCri. And there are some people who have built their CriCris and used the 10 by 3 tire on a 4-inch wheel, but honestly, it starts to look like Tundra tires on a CriCri. They're too big, in my opinion. When you consider the CriCri is really designed to use a tire that's between these two. If we're talking about tire size, the actual 210 by 65 tire is actually closer to this size tire in diameter than this one. And although it's a little bit wider, this is even that much more wider than it is compared to the other one. So this is really the biggest tire you should be putting on a CriCri if you're not going to use the original tire size. And so again, like the problem I said is that when you start looking at wheels, it's almost impossible to find a wheel or an inexpensive wheel that fits this tire properly. There is a few wheels that are available in 4 inches that are narrower. And some of them are made by aircraft companies like Grove and Matco, because this tire is in some cases used as a tail wheel also. Or actually used as a main wheel. So for example, this tire size is what is used on the BD5 Jet. So the BD5 and the BD5 Jet actually uses this exact 2.80 by 2.50 by 4 tire. And Matco is actually the one that makes the wheels, tires, and brake combination that's used on the BD5. Now, I had actually looked at that combination. I actually talked to Matco, and they were actually working with me to figure out if they could come up with a lighter weight combination, because that combination weighs about, I think it was 3.7 pounds for just the wheel and the brakes. Without the tire. So once you add the tube and tire on there, you were pretty close to 5 pounds for that combination per side, or per wheel combination. And that ended up to me really being a little bit too much weight, even though it was a nice combination. And if you use their calculator out there to calculate your braking requirements, that was actually 5 times the braking power necessary for what the CriCri used. Because of course the BD5 is a small airplane, but it actually weighs twice as much as the CriCri does. Its empty weight is actually more than the gross weight of the CriCri. So again, I looked at that combination. I really, really liked it. It was kind of expensive because it was, I think, around $300 for the wheels and brakes per side. And then if you wanted to go with the slightly lighter weight version of that, which also went from a 3/4 inch axle down to a 5/8 axle, which is what's required on the CriCri, the price went up to about $440 per wheel. And between the price and the weight, I just decided, again, it's too much. It's too much brakes, and it's too high cost. So I really kind of discarded that at this point as being an option. Although I think it is a nice combination, and they make a nice system. There's also wheels that are available from Grove that are narrower in that 2 1/4 range, which would work on here also. But again, they're expensive. I think they're $200 or $300 for one wheel to go that route, and then you'd still have to figure out how to make your own brakes to go on that on those wheels. And so again, I've actually kind of decided to go a different route. And one of the things that made me decide to go a different route was because of what I saw on the Sonex Jet. So I went back to this wheel and I said, well, wait a minute, this wheel is actually rated to 660 pounds static load. As we know, the gross weight of a CriCri is less than 400 pounds, if we divide that by 2, because there's 2 wheels on it sharing that load, we only have a requirement for 200 pounds. So this is way overkill, but it's a nice machined wheel, and it fits this Aero Classic tire that's used again on the Sonex Jet. This Aero Classic tire has a weight rating of 350 pounds. Again, we're talking about a CriCri that has a gross weight of less than 400. You divide that by 2, we only need 200 pounds. And this holds 300 pounds. I did some testing with this wheel and tire combination, and there's no problem with this handling the load of a CriCri. And if you look at the Sonex Jet, they're using dual wheels on the Sonex Jet to support that aircraft, which actually weighs more than double the weight of the CriCri. Now they're using double the amount of wheels and tires because they're using dual wheels and tires. But that's the gross weight of a subsonics is 1,000 pounds. So they're using this wheel and tire combination on an aircraft that's going to travel down the runway on these wheels and tires faster than a CriCri and at a higher weight. So I'm at less than half the weight of what that is on one set of wheels and tires. And so I've actually decided to go with the Matco wheel and the Aero Classic or tossed tire as my main wheel and tire combination. But then we have to start talking about brakes. So brakes are an issue no matter what we look at. And of course, most people who have done wheels, tires, and brakes outside of what was used on the CriCri have gone with a disc brake combination and typically used mountain bike brake parts. Now, I'm thinking about doing a similar thing, only using this wheel here and actually making a bracket that mounts on here that will allow me to install an industry standard bike brake rotor like this that's a 6-bolt to this wheel. And I'll just make an adapter that bolts on here and allows me to mount this on here, and then I'll be able to use bike brake, standardized bike brake rotors on my CriCri. And this is what other people have done, and there's actually a lot of ultralights and things like that that have switched to using similar bike brake components, which actually, after looking into it, are really, really well made. So I think with this Aero Classic tire, the Matco wheel, I'll make a brake adapter or a brake rotor adapter for this to mount this onto this wheel. And in combination with that, I'm going to use these mountain bike brakes. Now, the ones that I picked are actually made by Hope. Hope Tech is the company. I think Hope is the actual name of the company, but they're referred to as Hope Tech. So this is just a 2-piston caliper that's designed for a mountain bike brake rotor like this. And what I'm going to do is make a bracket that will allow me to mount this to the landing gear, you know, so that it sits here next to this wheel and is able to work with this 120 millimeter brake rotor. Now this is the smallest brake rotor that I could find that's made to the industry standard bolt pattern. 120 millimeters in diameter, that's the smallest one. There are some 110 millimeter rotors that are fairly common, but they're used on GoPeds and they all have a different pattern. Some are a 5-bolt, some are a 3-bolt. There's nothing standardized about those rotors, and I really wanted to stick with an industry standard pattern for the bracket that I create for this wheel. Now what that means is that somebody could go and buy any 120 millimeter rotor and be able to mount it on this wheel. Or if you wanted to go up to a 140 millimeter rotor because you wanted one slightly better, you needed better braking, I don't know. You know, we'll have to test it and see how this works. But then you could take any 140 millimeter rotor and attach it onto this wheel also. So by making it use the industry standard components, I think that's the best way to go. Now, one of the reasons I chose Hope Tech for the brakes, and there's a lot of mountain bike brakes available. There's, you know, Shimano, Magura, there's a ton of them out there. But one of the things that you have to be concerned about with the bike brakes is that the hand grip or the actual brake handle, it's actually uncommon for the hose that comes off of the bike brake master cylinder in parallel with the handlebars, and in this case we're going to be mounting this to the flight control stick. and this hose has to follow down the flight control stick and move, go off into the back of the aircraft where it goes to the brakes. But most of the bike brakes that I found on the internet had this hose angled out at almost 30 degrees, which of course, if we're moving the stick forward and backwards, that 30-degree angle, that hose is going to make it so that that hits the fuel tank in the CriCri, which we can't have. So what I really liked about these HopeTech controls and HopeTech master cylinder is that it had the hose exiting directly straight down parallel to the stick in the CriCri, which is the best way to have that work. Most of the mechanical brakes go straight down and they're not a problem, but apparently with the hydraulic brakes like these are, most of the bike brake companies have decided to angle that out away from the handlebars so that they can get the hose to wrap around and go down the center of the bike frame. But these components, I mean, this is really, really well made. This is all machined out of billet aluminum. It's got nice controls on it. It actually has adjustments here for the hand grip, the placement, and where it's located. You can move it in and out, the reach, that type of thing. And again, the brake calipers also. This brake caliper, this is all made out of billet aluminum. It's really, really well made. It's got banjo fittings for the hydraulic connections. It's got the bleed fitting here with a nice cap on it. Even the brake pads themselves, it's got a nice pin that you just remove, and then it's got an Allen key screw that unscrews, and then the pads just pop out. So this is going to be a very nice component, I believe, to use on the CriCri. So again, I think this combination of using this wheel and tire is going to work just fine. I'd say the only drawback of this might be that when this tire is inflated, it's a little bit narrower than something like this. So if you're landing on grass fields and that type of thing, maybe you want to go with a 4-inch wheel and go with a little bit larger tire. I really wish Matco made this wheel in a 4-inch wheel, but they don't. They only make it in this 3.7-inch diameter that fits this 200 by 50 tire, and it's designed to go in combination with their tail wheel assembly that they manufacture. They list this wheel on their website as a nose wheel, but from what I could tell, they're only using it on their tail wheel that they sell through Matco. So the only other thing I need to make in this combination then is I'll make a bracket to hold the brake caliper. I'll make a bracket to hold the rotor onto here, but then I'm also going to have to make the axles for the CriCri. Now, one of the things I actually found out was that I modeled in SolidWorks the original axle that was in the plans, which was a steel axle that was basically hollowed out so that it only had about a 2mm tube thickness, but the end of it was solid where the cotter key went through. But it was then welded to a plate that had 4 bolts on it that actually fit through the landing gear and was bolted to the side of it. I found out when I modeled that I was actually able to make a solid billet 2024 T3 aluminum axle that was as strong as the steel axle that was in the plans. And Matco actually sells axles, for example, for the BD5 that were 3/4 in diameter, which is an 1/8 inch bigger. These are only 5/8. But those axles in 3/4 were designed to at least hold 1,000 pounds. I'll have to look at that. But anyway, they were making all of their 3/4 inch axles and a lot of their axles out of 2024 T3. And I thought, well, that will actually be easier to machine. So I'm actually planning on doing aluminum axles for the CriCri using this wheel and tire combination, and I think that's going to work out pretty well. When I did the engineering and static load testing of the aluminum axle compared to the steel one that's in the plans, I found it had 99% of the same strength as the steel axle, and it weighed 1/3 less. So I think it's a good combination. The only thing I do have to worry about maybe a little bit is there's a little bit more flex in the aluminum axle than there is in the steel axle, and that can become a problem because we're actually mounting this brake rotor onto this wheel. So if there's any flex in the axle, it's going to make the brake rotor move. And then if we have our caliper sitting here that's fixed to the landing gear, it doesn't move at all. So the concern always is this brake rotor actually moving and binding at all with the brake caliper. And I'm going to have to do some testing with that to see how much flex I actually get. In the SolidWorks, it said I had about 0.3 millimeters of flex at double the weight of the aircraft. So at 400 pounds on one wheel, I was getting about 0.3 millimeters of flex, which, you know, isn't too bad, but I am going to have to test that. The other thing we could do, and I actually thought about this, I don't know if you can see this in the video here, but there's a lot of adjustment in both of these mounting points on the caliper, and part of that is so that you can move it back and forth when you're mounting it on a bike and adjust it. But we could put some bolts in there that actually make that a floating rotor if we wanted to, that allowed it to move a little bit side to side. The other thing that we could do is when I make this mount for the brake rotor, I could actually make the bolts that go into here, make it so that this floats a little bit. And that's actually not uncommon for certain motorcycles to do that. So either having a floating disc that slightly moves a little bit, or even a floating caliper might be an option. The other thing that I'm doing is for the brake caliper mounting, I'm going to use a standard brake adapter and install that on my brake system, so that I'll create a plate that this will actually bolt to, which will allow this caliper to bolt right to it like this. And I think, again, using industry standard components for bikes makes it so that all this stuff is interchangeable then. So I'm using, for example, this is a 0 millimeter offset industry standard brake mounting adapter that's designed for the caliper. This is what you'd use typically on a 140 millimeter brake rotor at the rear of a bicycle brake. Now I'm using that in combination with a 120 millimeter brake rotor, but because I'm designing it to be in the correct position for a 120 millimeter rotor and using the 0 millimeter offset, if you went to a 20 millimeter offset, for example, in this bracket, you should be able to upgrade this then to 140 millimeter rotor and then still have the caliper fit on there with the correct adapter. So again, that's another reason why I'm trying to use all the industry standard components so that this stuff is interchangeable. So anyway, that's what I'm planning on doing. I'm curious to hear anybody's comments, suggestions on what I've said, what you think. Again, I think this is a good proven combination now that I've seen, you know, like I said, the Sonics, Subsonics jet with this wheel and tire combination. I feel confident at, you know, much less than half the weight that this combination is going to work well. We know, based on what other people have done in the past with, you know, the bike brake rotors and bicycle brakes, that they work on a CriCri also, because I'm not the first one to do that either. The one comment I will make though is there have been people who have used the Azusa-Lite plastic or nylon, I guess, wheels on their CriCris. I think it's been proven that that isn't such a good idea. They are lightweight, but there is a lot of flex in that wheel that causes the problem that I just talked about, where the wheel is flexing on the axle, not the axle is actually flexing, but the wheel itself, the plastic wheel, is not strong enough to be able to support a brake rotor and braking combination attached to a plastic wheel. So again, I discarded those wheels also because they were 3 inches wide. So again, that's a big wide wheel that we don't need or want on a CriCri. In fact, to go back and look at the width of these rims, when I was talking about a 3-inch wide rim that's typically with a GoPed or a go-kart or you know, even the Azusa-Lite wheels, this rim on the inside is only about 1 3/8 wide. Outside dimensions, it's 1 3/4 inches wide. So you can imagine if we had a 3-inch wheel, which I believe is the inside diameter at the bead on those other wheels, you can see how much wider of a wheel we would end up having if we went with a, you know, some of those off-the-shelf GoPed wheel combinations. So again, curious to know your suggestions, your comments on this. Let me know what you think. I will do a second video once I have the bracket created for this wheel to mount my brake rotor, and I have the mount for the caliper done and the axle created. And what I'm going to do is actually do some static testing with that axle and putting about 400 pounds on it at least to see how it behaves and if it flexes at all and what it actually takes to bend it. So I'm going to do some testing like that, and hopefully in the next video on the wheel and brake and tire part 2 video we'll go over that. So see you on the next one.